Chapter 15 in the Dye Works. I'll take her. The girl who told on Petra thrust her spindly arm in the room. Me, cried a boy with pig grease on his fingers. Several of the servants clamored for the right to take Petra to the dye works, whatever that was. Petra was wondering about the source of her newfound popularity when Mistress Hild's response clarified things. You all just want to get out of work, the woman sneered. I finished my task, the freckled girl said timidly. The cream she had been ordered to whip was thickened into white, pillowy mounds. Mistress Hild nodded. She scribbled a note, passed it to the girl, and jerked her head toward the door. Petra reluctantly set down the glass of oily water. She followed her guide out the door. Astrophil sighed in relief. At the risk of sounding disloyal, I think a fight between you and Mistress Hild would have ended one way, with her turning you into mincemeat and serving you for supper. So long as mincemeat doesn't involve onions, I'd say there are worse fates. Once they were in the hallway, Petra sized up her companion. The girl's greenish eyes and dappled skin made her look like a woodland creature. Her head was lowered, her eyes focused on her small feet. She seemed a little lacking in vim and vigor, but Petra was very glad to escape the company of Mistress Hild and her sidekick, Miss Toothpick Arms. I'm Vieira, she said. What's your name? Susanna. Her country accent, like Petra's, was as thick as a tree syrup. You're from the hills, aren't you? I'm from Okno. Susanna stopped, looking at her feet, and gazed at Petra with delight. Really? I've always wanted to go to Okno. It's supposed to be so lovely. I'm from Morado. But I guess you've never heard of my village. Of course I have. Morado was not far from Okno. Petra had only ever heard of Morado as a town where you would never want to stay longer than the time it takes to ride through, but she thought that saying so would hardly be polite. My arm is getting tired. A little corner of Petra's cap was still sticking up in the air, propped up by one of Astrophil's tin legs. I cannot move. The spider poked Petra's head. Ow! What? Susanna looked at Petra, confused. Oh, nothing. Being in your cap is boring. Let me out. If you will not be working in the kitchen any longer, you do not have to wear this ridiculous headgear. Instructing the spider to crawl to the side of her head, facing away from Susanna, Petra pulled off the cap and shook her sweaty hair free. Astrophil happily took up his post on Petra's ear. They walked up a flight of stairs. Guards waved them past when Susanna presented Mistress Hild's letter. Petra noticed that the air had grown fresher, and they even passed a window, showing a cloudy sky. They were above ground. Am I being promoted? She asked cheerfully. Susanna gave her an apologetic look. I'm afraid you're not going to like where you're going. Where am I going? To the dye works? I know that, but what's the dye works? It's in the Thinker's Wing. The wing? Are we going to visit a bird? Perhaps Mistress Hild planned on having her fed to an enormous goose with a philosophical mind and fatty liver. The Thinker's Wing is a section of the second floor. It's a series of laboratories where the prince's magicians experiment. Susanna began to walk more slowly. The dye works is where the castle produces all the colors it uses: cloth, hair, wood, and even stone. The woman who runs it has skin that oozes acid, and if she touches you, Susanna shuddered. She's got a terrible temper, and she's always looking for a new assistant because she fires everyone she gets in a matter of hours. She and Mistress Hild hate each other. We're told to spit in the sorceress's food. I guess Mistress Hild figures you'll either get burned by acid, drive the dye works witch crazy, or get fired quicker than you can blink. Or all three. They turned the corner. The corridor presented many doors that echoed down the hall like two lines of dominoes. They reached a door that would have looked perfectly ordinary, except that it had two handles, one made from iron and the other painted a vibrant red. You see, Susanna said, pointing to the red handle. She needs to have her own special doorknob. The iron one would melt under her fingers. She knocked on the door. Silence ensued. She knocked again, and they both heard a screech. Go away! Susanna looked like she heartily regretted volunteering to escort Petra. Petra, however, felt more curious than afraid. She gripped the iron handle and pushed the door open. The room was like a moon in the middle of a month. It had a domed ceiling and was split into two halves, one sharply bright and the other as dark as a cave. A black velvet curtain separated the two sides almost entirely. It was not quite drawn, and as Petra squinted against the sunshine pouring in from the skylights cut above one half of the ceiling, she thought she detected some movement in the shadows behind the gray curtain. Susanna gasped when a gray head popped through the opening of the curtain. Two circles of thick glass took up almost all of the old woman's small, pale face. What? The woman howled. Mistress, I'm very busy. This is a crucial moment. If my lavender turns to purple, you'll pay for it. Yes, but your new assistant is here, Susanna explained. Ah, excellent. Dash the lavender. I can always make more later. She stepped past the curtain and stamped it shut behind her. Let's have a look at her. As Petra walked forward, the woman pointed at Susanna. You! Go find something else to do. Shoo! Get out of my laboratory. Susanna gave Petra a look that said, sorry, but what can I do? And scurried out of the dye works. Now, what have we here? The woman stepped closer to Petra, but kept a distance of 2 feet between them. Hands! Uncertain, Petra stood still. Hands, I say! Hold them out! Petra lifted her hands and began to extend them toward the snowdrop white woman. Not so close, cellar brat. Now, there. Now, flip them over. Ah, good hands. Very good, I believe. She turned her attention to Petra's face. Decent color, a nice pink of country life. You've got a healthy look about you. So I've been told, Petra thought of Harold Listic's ramblings. What are you wearing on your face? And the girl's polite, too. The woman's eyes were 2 foggy pools behind the glass, but Petra thought she saw an eyebrow quirk. They are spectacles. Are there no spectacles in your hinterland of a home? What are they for? They help me see, obviously, but these are no ordinary spectacles. Come here. She pointed Petra toward a table and tapped a metal pot filled to the brim with liquid. What color is that dye? Blue. Blue, she says. Try again. Light blue? The woman whipped off her glasses and plunked them on the table. Pick them up. They were heavy. Now look. Petra hooked the wire stems over her ears and gazed into the bowl. The liquid was swarming with spots of color, bits of pink, streaks of white, sprinkles of green, and a nice fat blob of violet. You see, crowed the woman, there you have the exact proportions of the different colors that go into making that particular shade of blue. You may very well say that the bowl holds light blue dye, but think of how many light blues there are. A robin's egg, a spring sky, an aquamarine are light blue. But what a difference lies between the colors of all 3. Petra watched the colors surge and mingle like a strange fish. It's amazing. Perhaps the woman recognized in Petra's voice the true ring of someone who can judge good work and beauty, for she nodded. Petra placed the spectacles back on the table. The woman blinked, her eyelashes fluttering like 2 small dusty moths. Then she put the spectacles back on, turned to Petra, and paused. She was looking into Petra's face so intently that the girl felt uncomfortable. But after a few seconds, the woman averted her stare and twitched her mouth. As odd as it may seem, Petra felt as if she had passed some exam without even knowing what she was being tested for. I suppose they told you all loads of jibber-jabber about how I'm an old banshee who eats servants alive and has burning acid skin. If Petra had been intimidated by Susanna's reports, she didn't feel an ounce of fear now. Maybe this was because she had gazed through the woman's spectacles. She felt as if she were at home, as if she were visiting a colleague of her father's. So she said frankly, yes, they did. Well, it's all true, except the part of eating you alive. I promise I'll just fire you in the good old-fashioned way. And maybe throw a pot of something at your head while I'm at it. No hard feelings, you understand. That's just the way things will be. As long as you don't mind if I throw something back, I can live with that. Cheek sauce. You're lucky that a touch of my hand could make the skin peel off your face, or I'd box your ears for that. So your skin really does ooze acid? Petra was fascinated. What do you think I need an assistant for? Of course, it's not the case that my skin is always acidic, or I'd be wearing no clothes and there might not even be a floor beneath us, for that matter. Right now, my skin is in a low acid phase, but sometimes I'll have acid attacks and it's difficult to say when they'll come. That's why the wires and frames of my spectacles, certain bowls in this room, a chair behind that curtain, and the doorknob are made of adamantine. She noticed the stunned look on Petra's face. Oh, I constantly forget how many imbeciles lurk in this benighted pile of rocks they call a castle. Adamantine is the strongest metal on earth, Petra breathed. Why, yes, the woman did not hide her surprise. But what would you know of it? How could you have missed that the doorknob was made of adamantine? Astrophil lectured. Why are you accusing me? How could you have missed that? Come on, Astro, she thought defensively. The doorknob was covered with enamel paint, but she did feel a little foolish, for if she had not been so distracted by looking through the spectacles, she would have recognized the dull, dreary colors of the stems. Adamantine is indestructible, Petra said out loud. Swords made from it cannot be broken or blunted. The metal can't be melted down. It's very difficult to find, and it's almost impossible to forge, which makes it. Okay, I'm back. Cost more krona than you can shake a stick at. Exactly. And while the prince values my talents, he's not going to foot the bill for every tool and bit of furniture in my laboratory to be made of adamantine. I could pay for it myself, of course, but why should I? Still, you have no idea how maddening, how heartbreaking it is to achieve the perfect shade of coral orange and have the bowl suddenly melt in your hands. The dye splatters everywhere and is lost, or the acid gets into the dye and it turns black. That's where you come in. You take my instructions, you be my hands. But if the doorknob is made of adamantine, why do you have two? The iron handle is unnecessary, isn't it? Even if you touch the red knob, the adamantine would absorb the acid. Everyone else can use it. The woman was scandalized. But it is my doorknob. What makes you think I want anyone to use it? Do you have any idea how many times a day you swampy servants wash your hands? I'll tell you, none. You'll use the iron one, you will. Yes, mistress. Petra trailed off. She realized she had no idea what to call her. Iris. Mistress Iris. And just Iris. Please, I don't have time for your mincing and suckings up. Leave that for the court to do. Is that your first name or your last? Well, if you must know, my name is Irenka Grisetta December, the 6th Countess of Krumloff. But that is really an insane amount of syllables to say. You may call me Iris for short. Krumloff? Astrophil's legs flickered against Petra's ear with excitement. She is a member of one of the most powerful families in Bohemia. They are cousins of the prince. Krumloff is an enormous, splendid estate of land, and its main city is said to be a miniature Prague. Whatever she is doing here, she should be holding ball dances and scheming to get her nephew on the throne, not working as a maker of dyes. Petra knew that some of the most important positions in the castle were held by academy-trained members of the nobility, but she, like Astrophil, was surprised to find someone of such high rank working like a normal person in a laboratory. Adamantine doorknobs, or no adamantine doorknobs, maybe she likes your job, Petra suggested. With the airy ease of someone who has told you her name, but finds no need to know yours, Iris ordered Petra to fetch a mortar and pestle and a jar on the topmost shelf near a skylight. The jar teemed with little black insects. Petra brought them to the table. We are going to make a brilliant red dye, crimson. It will be used to dye the velvet sash of the prince himself, so it must be perfect. These, Iris pointed to the jar of bugs, are Kermes beetles. They have been harvested from evergreen oaks. You are going to crush them. But they're not red. Iris's face looked strained, like she was just managing not to scream. No, she said through clenched teeth, they are not. But when you pulverize them alive, their blood is red, and a very special red at that. Now, when you tip them from the jar into the mortar, make sure that you grind them up quickly. They are devilishly fast. And so Petra began her second job at the castle that day, with a glad feeling in her heart. You might think that crushing bugs isn't much more enjoyable than chopping onions, and you might be right. But Petra could tell working for Iris would be, at the very least, anything but boring. Petra's eyes drooped as she walked with several other girls toward the women's dormitory. It was a long hall littered with many pallets on which some people were already sleeping. She scoured the hall for another free bed, hoping to see Sadie or Susanna. Eventually, she spotted Susanna, but she was curled up, sound asleep. Petra was relieved when Sadie waved and patted the pallet next to her. Petra snuggled under a wool blanket. The pallet wasn't the thickest ever made, but it was fairly clean and comfortable. Someone blew out the candles. As a smoky, waxy smell filled the air, Petra told Sadie about her day in a low whisper. Sadie had spent most of the afternoon preparing bedchambers for the visiting ambassadors, so her own report was not as interesting as Petra's, just filled with the tedium of changing sheets and dusting. Listening to Sadie's voice coming out of the blackness, Petra was struck by how perfect it was. She spoke Czech as if she had learned it from birth. Petra whispered, How do you speak Czech so well? Neil had such a funny way of talking. He could speak like me if he wanted to, Sadie whispered. We're both very good at learning languages. We've lived in so many different countries. Were you born here? No, I was born in Spain. When people ask why my eyes and my hair are so dark, I tell them that my father was Spanish. And that's true. I say nothing about my mother. They assume she's Bohemian. Was Neil born in Spain too? There is a brief silence. We think he was born in Bohemia. You think he was? Sadie was quiet, and Petra listened to the rattling snores of a nearby woman. Then came Sadie's hushed answer. Neil was abandoned as a baby. He was left near our clan's campsite. Nobody wanted to take him at first because he had no token around his neck. Token? A string or a bit of leather with a ring or a stone on it. Anything really. That means that a father has acknowledged a child as his. Neil was just wrapped in a blue blanket with no clothes or anything else. I was little at the time. I don't remember much about it, but my mother took him in. A blue blanket? Is that why his name is Neil? He said that it means blue. Yeah, well, yes, it does mean blue, but his full name means something more like a stone that is blue. Indranil means sapphire. Sadie paused. Then she said, Petra, don't mention any of this to him. He doesn't like to think about it or talk about it. I'm his sister. Our mother is our mother. End of story, all right? Yes, Petra sighed. It seemed that people were always telling her things that she had to keep to herself. Sometimes it was hard not to feel like a worry file with two legs.